Pennsylvania elected you as their lawyer, would you have on your checklist the opioid crisis, the student debt crisis, public corruption, and clergy abuse? Let's talk to our people's lawyer, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, who's crossing off that checklist one at a time. For me, there are three important questions in life.
Yeah.
For any individual, company, entity, city, state, country. Who am I? Why do I exist? Where am I going next?
Right.
So every superhero has an origin story. Who are you? What's your origin story?
I'm a guy who's grounded in my family and my faith. I'm a guy who believes deeply in public service. And not to sound corny, but I
When did you
always-
realize that?
Actually, it's an interesting story how I realized that. I grew up watching my mom, who's a public school teacher, here in Philadelphia, actually, and my dad, who's the local pediatrician, right? So like every family went to my dad when their kids were sick. And the common theme throughout both of them is people went to them for help. Like they were the go-to people in the community for that. And I always thought that that was really something special. And I actually went to college to be a doctor like my dad. I wanted to be that same person that everybody went to.
Right.
I'm gonna tell many people this story, but I'll share it with you. My freshman year at the University of Rochester, I was, believe it or not, playing basketball on the men's basketball team. Short Jewish guy like me, I was not too bad back then. And I was studying to be a doctor like my dad. And my freshman year, three things happened on the exact same day. One is I flunked out of pre-med. I worked hard, but I couldn't cut it. Two is I got cut from the men's basketball team. And feeling incredibly depressed that my days of becoming an NBA star and a doctor combined were over, a third thing happened. Someone knocked on my dorm room door and said, "You should run for student council, student government." I said, why the hell would I want to do that? That's not something I'd ever been interested in, not something that I had aspired to. And they said, "Look, man, you're having a pretty bad day. You got nothing else going for you. You should run. You'll win." I said, "Well, how do you know I'm going to win? Because I can't take too many more losses in my life right now." He goes, "Well, I don't think anybody else is running, so you'll be fine." And the truth is I ran. Someone else did run. I won. And I fell in love with advocacy and I didn't realize at the time it would be government service, but service as a way to have others come to me to solve their problems. A few weeks into that gig on student council, the administration of the college cut all the funding for sports teams. And we staged a sit-in and we rallied and we fought back and we got their budget restored. I mean, it was a big win. I thought for the first time I saw the power of sort of organizing and politics as a way to solve a problem. And then I just went all in, right? Studied political science, went to work on Capitol Hill, ran for elected office myself, and I've never looked back. I've just always felt that this was my calling. But it was not, growing up thinking I'm going to go into government. It was growing up thinking I wanted to serve others. I wanted to help others the way my mom and dad had shown me. You and I have talked a lot over the years about our frustration with the fact that politicians oftentimes just seem to talk about things. We get to act, we get to do stuff, we get to solve problems. And I mean, if you remember, AJ, I ran to be a different kind of AG. I ran to do more than just drug busts on street corners, which is a lot of what this office had done in the past. I ran to take on corruption. I ran to deal with financial issues like student debt. I ran to bring reform to the institution. I ran to bring fairness to our criminal justice system. And so I like to think I'm just doing what I said I was going to do and doing it in a way that is meeting the needs of the people of Pennsylvania.
When I first learned that you were thinking about running for Attorney General, you were at that time this rock star in the Democratic Party who turned Montgomery County from a staunch Republican county. And many, I think, not just me and others, have given you credit for turning it the other way. I'm sure you will, out of humility, say that you and many others, but I think behind your back people say you were the main reason, I think, for the shift towards becoming Democratic. And then you ran for statewide office. Mm-hmm. At the time, I remember thinking, he doesn't have the support of Johnny Dock and the electricians unions and some of the key supporters in Philadelphia, which I thought you would need to counterbalance your opponent, who at that time I thought was Zapala, if I recall, in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. pundits in the background said this may be a tough race, even though he's the darling of the Democratic Party, he may
Right.
not win. And you won. Now, have the unified, is it now united in rule, or is it still divided, the Democratic base, for you?
Yeah, look, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we've got broad support today all across Pennsylvania. But I'm equally proud of the fact that I ran independent of a system that I think has a lot of problems in it. I got to be an attorney general, and I'm not beholden to anybody. And by the way, all those institutional powers here in Philadelphia who were against me, it didn't matter much. I still won the city by 30 plus points. And it was because the people of Philadelphia, the people of Pennsylvania, wanted to elect the people's lawyer, wanted to elect someone who was going to look out for them, not just the institutionalists, not just the people who have been clinging on to power for very long. Now, the day after the election, I turned away from what happened in 2016 and just looked forward. I do think it's important that you don't dwell on the past and you always move forward, and that you're humble and you have humility in wins or losses. So I'm going to look to build as broad a coalition as I can going forward, but I'm never going to be owned. I'm never going to be beholden to anybody.
Let's play a game of best worst.
Yeah.
Best day as an elected official, worst day as an elected official.
I think in some ways they were both the same day. Let me explain what I mean. August 14th, 2018, when we released the report on clergy abuse and the cover-up that existed for decades. 301 predator priests, thousands of child victims, a conspiracy that went all the way to the Vatican. It was the best day because I was finally able to free the survivors of the burdens that they had been carrying for so long in secret, to let them know they were believed. I mean, there was something so uplifting about that, even though the subject matter was incredibly challenging and difficult. And in some ways it was the worst day too, because it highlighted the horrors that exist in our society today. That was one of the most pivotal moments of my life, and there's not been a day that's gone by since then where I've not had some interaction with a survivor, a parishioner, or what have you, that has continued to fuel my work to protect these individuals. I would say that could be categorized as both the best and the worst. Worst for subject matter, best because the work we had done had really given these wonderful people some hope for the first time in their lives.
I'm a devout Catholic, and
Yeah.
for me, I think the betrayal for all Catholics and for all humans that our institution, our faith, participated in indirectly or directly, perpetuating the harm and the pain that many of the abuse victims feel.
Yeah.
So I can imagine being a dad to four, just being a human, quite frankly, how that must have been so moving, and to have the power and the opportunity to do something about it. Were you worried that you were taking on an institution as big as the Catholic Church and 1.3 billion other Catholics around the world who sort of are very protective of their own institution? Were you worried about that?
So let me unpack everything you said. First off, as a devout Catholic, as a parishioner, I want you to know, and I want all Catholics to know, I think it is an incredibly wonderful faith, and it's parishioners like you who are going to help the church move forward from this. I never thought about any backlash from taking on a big institution, really arguably probably the most powerful institution in the world, like the church. We were singularly focused on the survivors and the legal obstacles that the church put in our way that were making it very difficult to get that report out. And it wasn't until maybe the night before we released the report where I began to think there's going to be maybe some real backlash here. Catholics are about 30% of the voters in Pennsylvania, population in Pennsylvania, and this could be the end of my political career. And it was really actually probably the first moment in my public service career where I was totally cool with that, because I thought this issue was so much bigger than me, so much more important than some election or some race. And actually the truth is, after the fact, the response from parishioners, the response from the public has been the opposite of maybe what I feared, and it has been incredibly warm and positive, because I think they know I wasn't battling the Catholic Church as much as I was fighting on behalf of survivors and fighting to make sure they got they had their truth told.
Is the church now working in concert with officials like you, or are we still doing the dance of reconciliation, rehab, redemption? Where are we from your vantage point?
I think the church has done nothing to prove me wrong when I said earlier that the church can't be trusted to police itself. There was a very clear marker I laid down when we released the report that if the church really was prepared to move forward, really was committed to reform, they would simply adopt and support the 4 reforms recommended by the grand jurors, right? Opening up a civil window, getting rid of criminal statute of limitations, not letting confidentiality agreements bar communication with law enforcement, clarifying who mandated reporters are. They wouldn't endorse those things. They wouldn't be supportive of those things. I don't think the church as an institution has moved very far. Now, parishioners, boy, have they moved. Parishioners are demanding change. Parishioners are inspiring me every day. Nationwide, let's look at what has happened. 21 state attorneys general have publicly announced that they've opened investigations. In Michigan, about a month or 2 ago, they charged 7 predator priests. A few weeks ago in Missouri, they recommended 12 predator priests be charged, and there will be more in other states. The feds have launched an investigation. Obviously, I'm not at liberty to speak in specifics about these things. Globally, the Pope himself acknowledged the truth in our report, has taken personnel steps, at least as it relates to one very prominent official, Cardinal Wuerl in Washington, D.C., who had been the Bishop of Pittsburgh and was named many times in our report. He convened a global summit to try and address this. And I realize there are parishioners who are happy with the results and parishioners who feel like not enough happened. It's really not my place to judge that, but the fact is he convened that meeting. Look, there is a clear difference between the way the Pope has responded by acknowledging the truth and convening discussions to try and do something about this, being very clear in his language that this is wrong, versus the Archbishop and the bishops here in Pennsylvania, who have literally spent millions of dollars of parishioner money to lobby against the reforms recommended by the grand jury that are now stalled in the Senate. And the Archbishop has been a leader among the bishops to try to stop these reforms from happening. So I think it's less about Josh Shapiro's opinion and more about just the facts of the case. And the facts clearly show that the Archbishop and all the bishops in Pennsylvania have been opposed to the reforms. I mean, what happened in this country? How did we get away from fighting about tax policy and healthcare policy and criminal justice policy? By the way, issues that yes, create divisions, but healthy divisions where we work through those and we come out with policies, to things that are just so foul and personal and divisive.
Do you think that's top down, or is it also bottom up?
I think it's both. I think Trump is a symptom of that.
But you can't make a clapping sound with just one side, right? So I mean, the same argument. I'm not a Trump supporter, but just to be out of fairness to Trump supporters.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not attacking Trump supporters because I think a lot of them are frustrated with the rhetoric in this country. But go ahead.
But that's the point, right? For them, they're watching the Rocky movie and they're Soviets hoping that Draga beats Rocky because they have a different perspective. Depending on where you're standing, if I have a 6 in front of me, you're looking at a 9. It's just a different perspective because you're sitting over there. Trump versus the other side, right? But my point is, isn't the Facebook and the Twitter? I mean, those are the new ghettos of grievances, where you identify your tribe and you push the hate or love on the other side. Where you have a feedback loop that sort of keeps pushing, reinforces our existing beliefs. You walk in not looking to be educated, but to really inform what we already know. Instinctive bias, just pushing that out. And if you see one person who resonates and says, oh yeah, we also agree. If you have 2 people, 3 people, now you believe that it must be true. So it doesn't matter what we consider to be rational. There's another group that believes their viewpoints are just as rational. They're just as much about love. And when they see the other side saying that we hope that Trump physically gets hurt, they're also spewing the same hate that they're mimicking the same hate that they are protesting.
I
see where I'm
hear
going
you.
with this
I've got a
thing?
little bit of
That
a
both
different-
hands are potentially dirty or not?
Yeah, I think the rhetoric is irresponsible on the left and the right. But more important than that, putting aside the left-right political
Sure.
dynamic, I want to make 2 points on what you said, because I think it was a critically important point. In the wake of the massacre at Tree of Life,
Yes.
I spoke in both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Allentown as well, and other communities. And I had a similar theme in everything I said, and that is that hate speech begets hate crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And we in law enforcement see a direct correlation between hate speech and activity on some of these websites and chat rooms and other things, which lead to violence in our communities. So there is a direct correlation between
There always has been.
that hateful, always has been. And by the
Always
way,
has been.
that's not unique to Donald Trump.
Yep.
He just happens to have a much bigger microphone.
And we almost look like back in pre-World War II era, anti-Semitism is at its all-time high. You have authoritarian regimes that control, whether it's Philippines, whether it's
Right.
United States, whether it's all those countries, where
Right.
even India with Modi and others, you have sort of strongmen controlling nationalism is at an all-time rise, tribalism is an all-time
Yeah.
rise. It does seem so that your note that post-2020 we may be turning the tide because we have had enough. You know, you're also running against, not to throw coffee on that optimism, you're also running against new tools of hate, whether it is deep fake technology that you can't tell who's talking, who's not, whether it is algorithms that are pushing hate, they're not real people, the trolls that, computers, AI is becoming more sophisticated. You have foreign agents that are infiltrating our Facebook and Twitter, promoting hate. How do you fight against all of that? Because, it's no longer a simple 1950s or 1960s environment.
We're one of the states leading the investigation into Google. We're investigating Facebook. We're doing our part to try and make sure we're controlling these platforms that are often used to push out hate and foment hate. But I want to come back to one thing you said earlier. I think we are misreading the people of Pennsylvania if we think of them in the bucket of pro-Trump, anti-Trump, or far left, far right. And remember the 2016 election. The two candidates running above me on the ballot on the Democratic side lost, and I won. And I got a couple 100,000, almost 300,000 more votes than Donald Trump, got more votes than anybody in Pennsylvania. And there were people who voted for Donald Trump and voted for Josh Shapiro. Believe it or not, those people exist. And that's because I don't view the electorate, and I don't view our politics today as far left, far right, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. I think there's a lot of people out there.
I think most people will feel that way too. They're not left or right. They're not ideologically wedded to a party, but instead they are wedded to their conscience.
They're wedded to their
They just want to live
conscience.
a good life and
They do,
and be
and
fair to others.
Right, and they're frustrated. And I think...
But I don't think they have the voice though. So I think that, to me, there are three types of people, Josh. The people who can only hear whistle, whistle.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are a handful of people that are very good at pushing out dog whistles.
Yeah.
Right? And, there could be politicians, corporates, there could be anybody that knows how to do a good op-ed, or somebody pushes out a troll on Facebook or Twitter. And then you have people who are good at not just hearing dog whistle, but speaking in dog whistles.
Yeah.
Those are the Koch brothers, the Soros, and so the real Illuminatis of the world who sort of know how to push and stir rebellions and revolutions. They now have new technology, things like deep fake, which, by the way, in 6 months, you won't be able to tell what is deep fake, what is not, because the technology is advancing so much that you can't even police it with technology.
Right.
That is the world that I think, they are the ones who stir revolutions. They are the ones who stir problems and conflict. And the rest of us are, I think, just cattle moving in the direction that they have already designed for us to move in.
Yes, it is true that...
Am I being very pessimistic?
A little bit, but it's okay, because we are all going to get through this. But yes, our social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., it rewards extremism. It rewards the loudest voice with likes and retweets and whatever. But it's also not reality. It's not the reality of what I see when I travel around Pennsylvania. When I travel around Pennsylvania, I see people with serious economic anxiety and they should have it because government, Republicans and Democrats, have failed them for so many years. I see people who are really wondering whether or not they're going to be able to grow up in a safe environment, whether because of something they see on their street corners or the fear of their kids getting shot at their school.
Right.
There are realities to the anxieties people feel, and they are founded and they are real, and politicians who ignore that do so at their own peril. And if you just pay so much attention to what the noise is on social media and ignore the realities of what's happening out in the community, I don't think politically you're going to be very successful. But more importantly than that, we're not going to solve the problems that we need to solve. I think it's time we listen. Now, people have said to me, well, how is it, coming back to how I won and Trump won, how is it that Trump won in that environment? Well, the truth is, he went to a lot of those communities and he spoke to their economic anxiety. Now, he fed them a bunch of bullshit. I don't know if I can say that here, but he really did. And people bought it, but he was talking to them. And he spoke to that anxiety, he spoke to that concern that existed in places like Erie and places like Wilkes-Barre, places like Johnstown, communities that I think have been forgotten by government for too long. And so those are communities I show up in all the time.
$1.6 trillion, that's how much Americans owe in student loans, 45 million or so Americans being impacted by that. On average, that's $30,000 per person who owes that student debt. It has grown 2% since last year. Pennsylvania is the second largest city in terms of, deep in that hole, Philadelphia being ground zero. Now, I know you love the job that you're in, Attorney General, which is, you said, was the top job and the best job in the world. But let's say if I'm a headhunter and I see a vacancy in the governor's seat or maybe the president's seat, and you're now either governor or president, what would you do with the student loan debt? Would you forgive, as Bernie Sanders and others would want? Would you just take $1.6 trillion and say, we'll figure out a way to just wipe out the student debt?
Sure. I'm going to answer that question, but real quick, what I've done as Attorney General is look at that $1.6 trillion number. Look at the fact that Pennsylvania is the second highest amount of debt per student than any other state in the nation, and said, well, what's contributing to that? What we found contributing to that were predatory lenders like Navient, who added, as my lawsuit alleges, $4 billion on the backs of students and families. We're suing Navient. We're going to get those students their money back. As for what we do going forward, no, I don't think we should just wipe out everybody's loan. But I do think that we should construct a system. And again, I'm a law enforcer, not a lawmaker, but you asked me what I would do. I think that in exchange for some type of service to this country, whether as a teacher, whether in the military, what have you, that after a handful of years of doing that service, we can wipe out your loans. I think that's one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do.
Paid off through service, you mean?
Pay it off through service.
Okay.
I don't think Americans are into free lunches, but I do think Americans who are engaged in the community deserve more of a break than they're getting.
But Americans are into free lunches in terms of Chapter 11 for corporations. They do have a clean slate and have a reemergence. So they believe in not free lunches, but they do believe in redemption, where we wipe out the old and we start new. So why not for individuals?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we really need to do is reduce the cost of college, make it more accessible. So I would be a fan of making sure we eliminate the cost of community college, eliminate the cost of our state system of higher ed schools, and create an avenue for those who need to get college for free or dramatically reduced rates. I think that that's important. That will also bring down our debt. So hold those predatory lenders accountable. Create a pathway to wipe away your debt through service. Create opportunities out there for free or dramatically reduced cost of college. And that's going to benefit everybody. And here's the thing. There's someone watching this program today who says, that's ridiculous. We shouldn't be giving stuff away for free. But what I would say to that person who maybe doesn't have student debt the way I still do, or someone who doesn't have a kid who's about to go to school or whatever the case may be, we are all worse off because of the student debt crisis. Because if some young person graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt can't go be innovative, can't create the next best widget, the next best, pharmaceutical product, or the next best app that's going to benefit all of our lives because they're tied to a desk in some job they don't want just to pay off their student loans. We all suffer. And so we've got to figure out a way to deal with this, both in terms of, as I said, holding the bad actors accountable and creating new policies to advance college access without massive debt. I think we're all going to be better off.
Would you be okay with, if you had the power, if you, just as an observation or opinion, levying a tax at anybody with 50 million or above at a certain percentage, 2%, over $1 billion, maybe 2 or 3%, using that revenue from the taxing the wealthiest amongst us to, rather than redistribution, reinvestment, so that we can contain the cost of healthcare, and make education more amenable and more accessible for others, spread it out differently. Would that be something that you would be in favor of?
I don't think that that's the question that we should be answering. I think the first question we need to answer.
That's the question I asked them.
I got you, but I think you've got to look at your spend. And let me give you my history on this. When I took over as the first Democrat to lead Montgomery County in 150 years, everybody said, are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to this tax? What are you going to do about taxes? And I said, forget taxes for a second. Let's look at what we're spending. And we did something that most other governments don't do. We did zero-based budgeting. So we started our budget with a blank sheet of paper and said, what's our mission? And we spent weeks defining our mission. What does it cost to fulfill the mission? And then what do you have to do to pay for that mission? And lo and behold, we actually cut spending, we didn't raise taxes, and we were able to operate a far more effective government, and by the way, a far more compassionate government, because we were spending on the things that needed to be spent on. I think government, both in Harrisburg and Washington, it's just, one problem built upon another, because no one's ever stopped, stripped it all away, and said, how much do we need to spend to fulfill our mission? And I think when you look at government that way, the way I have a proven track record of doing, you end up making far more fiscally responsible determinations. And then, as we did in Montgomery County, after doing zero-based budgeting, we said, you know what, we need more investment in infrastructure. And so we passed infrastructure fee. And then we said, we need more investment in our community college to make it more accessible. And we passed a fee for our community college investment. And every so often you get a little bit of grumbling, but by and large it was met by support in the community, because the public knew we weren't spending more than we had to. We were justifying where their tax dollars were going. And I think that rather than these candidates who go out on the national stage and talk about, we're going to tax this group and tax that group and create this sort of class warfare structure, we should be looking at what we're spending. Now, do I agree that this wage gap is unsustainable and the have-mores have grown even more, and those who are struggling to get by have been sort of flatlining their wages? Yeah, and we've got to work at that. But I think just to say we're going to raise taxes on one group ignores some of the fundamental problems that we have in the way we run our governments and the way our economics works.
So let's end with greatest Eagle, greatest Sixer.
I'm a huge Hoops fan. I love Mo Cheeks, probably not the greatest, but just someone I love. He was the floor general, man. He knew how to run the offense.
Interesting
he
choice.
Knew
you
when
didn't
it
put
was
Barkley,
time.
Iverson.
Well, hold on. He's not the greatest talent.
No,
right?
but it doesn't have to be. For you, it doesn't have to be
Mo
the greatest
Cheeks.
talent. Mo Cheeks.
Mo Cheeks.
For his leadership.
He knew how to lead. He knew when it was his time to take a shot. He knew how to feed the ball to Moses or whomever he was passed to do. He knew how to
use
use
a gentleman.
Doc.
Complete
Total
gentleman. Mo Cheeks.
Mo Cheeks.
What about an Eagle? Give me the greatest Eagle from your perspective, not from talent, but your perspective.
I think Carson Wentz has the opportunity to really be the greatest.
What do you like about him most?
I like the way he learns. I like the way he's reflective on himself and learns that he needs to be a better person to his teammates. He talked about that in the offseason. His improvement game after game is extraordinary. He always wants to get better. He's a gentleman. He's grounded in his faith. We talked about that earlier.
I was just going to sum up in that way. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between what you're describing, Carson Wentz, and what I know about Josh Shapiro, which is that Carson's locker room, you're allowed to have objections, but he's the general, but you're allowed to have different thoughts, and I think there's equality in terms of sharing of the burden of leadership, but also grounded in faith. There's humility, there's dogged work ethic.
Yeah.
I don't think he probably sleeps as much as he probably should either.
Right.
And we also pray that he never gets injured because we won Super Bowls and
Every
we don't
time
want
he
you getting
winces.
injured. And hopefully a headhunter will call you and convince you that Attorney General is not the only job out there. Maybe there are other jobs too. Maybe you may consider it in the future. Thanks, Josh.
Great to be with you, man. Thanks.
Good to be with you.
That was fun.
Take